Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end of life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Today's episode is about advance directives and the profound impact they have on our end of life experiences. With us is a very special guest, Maureen Kures, founder of A Radiant Mourning and a good friend and mentor to me. She specializes in guiding individuals and families through the complexities of end of life planning. Together, we're going to address some common misconceptions, practical steps for creating and updating your advance directives, and the emotional and spiritual conversations that accompany this process. Maureen, welcome. It is such an honor to have you here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. This is the topic I love to speak about.
Can you first tell us a little bit about yourself and the journey that led you to establish A Radiant Mourning?
Yes, my background, I've been a nurse for 40 years this month. Shocking to me. But my first job that I got out of nursing school was on an oncology floor. And I thought, I want no part of this. I came from a family that didn't speak about death and dying. I remember when my grandfather died and there was crying, but that was it. We didn't express emotions around it because everyone just held everything in so tight. So I was very afraid of working with people that were dying. And I had other plans for myself. I wanted to be a flight nurse. And I had it all mapped out. But what I didn't realize is that I would fall in love with the end of life. I would fall in love with the families, the patients that I cared for. And I realized that death wasn't as scary as I thought. And when we had conversations and working oncology, people have to face their mortality because they're diagnosed with a life limiting disease, and not everyone goes into remission, especially back in the 80s. So it really just it really impacted how I looked at it, and that it could be a very peaceful process where families came together. I also I worked in many other fields, but then I worked in the ICU. And because I wanted to be a bone marrow transplant nurse at Stanford, and they required ICU training. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get my ICU training. Never did become that bone marrow transplant nurse, but what I saw was, in the ICU, you see more of the families that are there because of a traumatic incident, an accident, an unexpected heart attack. Well, those people had never had conversations about what they would want if they were in that position, and I saw so many families fractured and divided and fighting, and I just knew I never wanted anyone I loved to go through that. And so over the years, I became a very outspoken advocate for getting healthcare power of attorney documentation done, because I said, if you have some person that can legally speak on your behalf, it doesn't have to be that way. I've learned that it's so much more. But when I stepped away from my last nursing job in a clinical setting, my friends encouraged me to start this business, Radiant Mourning, getting people to talk about and plan for their end of life while they're healthy and can make decisions that they would want. That's sort of belong.
For those who might not be familiar with what an advance directive is, can you tell us what they are and why they're important?
Yes, I would love to. Advance directives, they are the power of attorney for healthcare documentation, and they're the living will. And they put it together to form what's called the advance directive. You might hear the word advanced care planning, but the advance directives are the paperwork. And why that's important is because that's the story you tell those that matter most to you about what you would want. That's when you choose your person and your backup person to make decisions if you can't. If the what ifs in life happen, what if that traffic accident, what if that massive heart attack and you end up in a ventilator on the ICU? That's their guide. And the more you can write out and the more decisions you can make, the more of a gift you give to them because you're giving them the guide to follow.
How do advance directives empower individuals and their families during the end of life process?
It empowers them because they know what to do. They know that they can honor their family member or their loved one's wishes. I'll give you a story. My uncle who was from California, but ended up in Seattle because um, I lived up here and his daughter lived up here. Both of his sons had died by this point in his life, and his wife had dementia, so they moved up here. Um, Once his wife died, he went back to California, but he wanted me to be his healthcare decision maker because he knew his daughter had been through so much emotions with death, and he didn't want to put her into the position of ever having to make a decision for him. Well, fast forward a few years, he was 88, had just driven up to Seattle from Palm Desert 2 weeks before. We had the conversation again about we reviewed everything because he always wanted me to know. And 2 weeks later, he didn't wake up one morning, but he was not dead. He was unresponsive. He had a bleed into his head. And I got to speak to the surgeon who wanted to go in and evacuate the bleed from his brain. And I said, he was just at his golf kickoff luncheon yesterday and super excited about the golf season. Will he be able to golf again? Well, no, but there's probably a 25 to 50% chance we can get him to be able to speak again. I'm like, that's not good enough. So the answer is no. And, he kept pushing me, and I said, can he live independently? Well, no, but there's a 25 to 50% chance we can get him to speak again. And I said, but that's not good enough. That's not what he wanted. He gave me clear instructions. And even though I was devastated, this is my beloved uncle, I had the gift of knowing exactly what he wanted and what was not acceptable to him. And what was not acceptable was only having a 25 to 50% chance of speaking again, not being able to live independently, not being able to golf, not being able to live this vibrant, active life that he had. So, the doctor, on the fifth time that I said no, he finally gave in. But, it was hard. It was hard. I was devastated. It came as a shock, but I was also so grateful for that guide to follow, that
Yeah.
he had written out very clearly, that he updated, that he discussed with me often. So it gave me that gift of knowing.
Yeah, I love that focus on quality of life versus just living. Um, and, I know the advance directive, it's a couple pages long, but so much more than just filling out a form. Um, in your practice, how do you assist individuals and their families in navigating those complexities of the advance directive, of having those conversations?
Usually I start with either, it's funny. I really thought it would be younger people that I worked with initially that had older parents and maybe kids, that sandwich generation woman. I really wanted to focus on someone like myself. But what I found, it was the seniors coming. And so usually it was one or both spouses or partners that wanted to work through it. So first we talk about the power of attorney for healthcare documentation. A lot of people have heard about healthcare powers of attorney. That's the paperwork. It's called your decision maker, your healthcare agent, your healthcare surrogate. There's so many different words, but choosing that person that can speak on your behalf if you become unable to do so. So we really work through that. Everyone thinks, oh, my spouse or my partner, but that might not always be the best person for you, because it is emotional. Like my uncle chose not to choose to have his daughter in that position. So we really work through who's the best person, why would they be, and then there's always should be a backup, because let's say you do have your spouse or your partner, and you together are in an accident, and then neither of you are able to speak for yourself or on behalf of the other, then it would be the secondary power of attorney healthcare agent that would step up. So we really work through how to choose that person, why to choose that person, how to rule out people, not for good or bad, just because they might not be right for the role, or it might be too much. And then they ask. You can always have to ask someone to step into this role for you, because it is an emotional role. It does take um, a lot of fortitude to do. Like I said with my uncle, I've been a decision maker for a few people, but he was the hardest because had my heart, you know. So choosing wisely on that. And then we go into the advanced directives once we have that all settled, and that they know they have to ask first. I would also say on healthcare decision makers and getting that power of attorney documentation done, I do not believe, this is my belief, that it is a good idea to have healthcare decision makers because they can disagree. And this is what happened to me. Unbeknownst to me, a woman that was like my adopted mom here in Seattle um, ended up being rushed to surgery when she was having a medical procedure. And I found out that I was her healthcare decision maker, along with a man that I did not really know very well.
Mm.
And I had never spoken to her about any of her wishes. She had never shared anything with me. And and he had one idea, and I was going off my experience and how I knew her to be. So I had to guess. It was stressful. We stressed, we guessed, it was chaos, and we disagreed. And luckily, she ended up surviving after many, many months. But it was a very difficult position to be in. And that's why you need one person that can make that decision for you.
Yeah.
We and so I can go into that for hours, but that I think if people don't get anything else done, make that decision
Yeah.
because and then let them know your wishes.
Yeah. That is the most important part because what's on the piece of paper, uh, the only real legally binding part of that piece of paper is your healthcare advocate. And the rest
Is
of
it
it,
your
because there are so many scenarios that can happen, they can't get all those scenarios on a 2-page piece of paper. So
No.
that's why you have your
And
advocate.
this is when we get into talking about the living will portion, our decisions, I always tell them to add extra sheets and write as much as they want, because the more they write, the more those that matter most to them can understand how these decisions were made. But we're going to talk about even more than that. But it is the only legally binding. The living will portion is not legally binding. It is a guide, but by getting that healthcare, the advanced directives, getting the whole thing notarized or witnessed. I don't know California. I can't remember. I
Yeah,
worked
you
with
need 2
two
witnesses in
witnesses.
California. It doesn't have to be
Most
notarized,
states,
but these witnesses can't be family members and they can't be the healthcare advocate
healthcare.
or the backup.
Yeah, it's just that's the legally binding part of the directive. So that's why, in my opinion, it's the most important, because that's that person that will speak on your behalf.
What are some of the common misconceptions that you run into
About
about
healthcare.
advanced directives? I'm sorry.
Oh, advanced directives. Okay, I will tell you, it's not a misconception, it's a feeling. And I can't tell you how many people have said to me, I don't want to do that because I could manifest my own death. And I tell them, you know what, that is a very real fear and concern. And you're not alone. The first time I heard it, I thought, gosh, that's an interesting thing. But as I've heard it many times. In fact, I just heard it again the other day. But it's a true fear. And so to talk through that fear with them is important. Most people don't manifest their death by doing their advanced directives, but once everyone that felt that way that I have worked with and they get through it, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel such a sense of freedom now that, okay, this is done. If anything's happened to me, I'm covered. And they said, I remember this one woman, she's like, okay, I don't feel the same way at all. Like, I know I'm not going to die because I did these. So, but she's like, but if I do, I have someone that knows what I want.
Yeah, when I work with estate attorneys, all of them have said the same thing, that the most difficult part of getting everything together is the advanced directive. People do not want to do it. And the estate attorneys they don't know how to talk about death very well. So it's uncomfortable. So it's very interesting how adverse we are to talking about that.
We are really adverse to talking about that. As you know, Traci, I'm part of a doula collective that we put on doula trainings. And I'm going to just share a quick story. The last week, I had to go pick up my husband's car from the Toyota dealership, but I couldn't get it before the our training started. And so I called and said, "Could you lock the keys in the car?" They said they'd leave the keys at the sales desk if I could get there by 8. Well, our training ended at 8 or 7:30. And my son came and rushed me over, and I ran in at 1 minute till 8. And I was telling the man, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so late. I thought I'd be here sooner." I put on a training, we were doing a training webinar, and it ran a little bit over. And he said, "What was it about?" I said, "Oh, we train death doulas, end of life doulas." He's like, "What?" He just, I said, we teach, train doulas to work with people at end of life." He's like, "I couldn't think of anything more awful or depressing. How do you do it?" And he's just going on. And I said, I would love for you to reframe that, because I said, what's awful and depressing as a nurse that's worked at the bedside and had to take care of people on ventilators that probably never would have wanted to be there. That's what's awful and depressing. But by planning and talking about it and having someone know your wishes and someone there to guide you if you're at the end of life, I said it really leads to peace for not only the person dying, but their families too, and their friends and whoever is close to them. So I said, I'd love for you to reframe your thinking that it's going to be joyful or peaceful at least, because I said, I hate to tell you this, but you will die someday. You have no choice. You can't get out of it. So what you can do is reframe what you are saying.
As we've just said, these are very emotional conversations that are not only very emotional for the person that you're making the advance directive for, but even more so for their family members. Like, I've noticed the person who I'm creating the advance directive for, I'm talking to them, they're usually calm. They're not loving them, but they're usually very calm and clear-minded. The family members are really, it's very interesting. How do you approach the emotional and sometimes possible spiritual conversations that comes with discussing advance directives?
I first of all, my big thing is to get the work done and then have a meeting with your family. And the family is, I always say it's loosely, those that matter most to you, because it's not always blood relatives that are involved. But the more we can share with them, the more they will be able to honor the wishes, and they don't have to like it. And so as we gather, or as I help them gather their family together, whether I'm there or not, we talk about that it's going to be emotional. It's an emotional topic. None of us like to really contemplate our death. I mean, maybe us death doulas that have had to go through this work, and me with working in end of life fields for almost 40 years, it's much different. But even still, I had a family meeting with my adult sons and my husband well before I ever started this business. It was sort of the framework to start my business, but it was emotional. We laughed, I cried, mostly me, but they all got a little emotional talking about the subject, but we talked through things. So know that it's going to be emotional. Know that people are going to not always want to hear what you have to say. And this is where you can start with a meditation, a prayer if you're religious, and set the tone. And I always tell the family or the person that's going to be with their family, tell them, you don't have to agree with my wishes, but I ask you to honor them. And I want to talk to you about them so you know coming from me. If it gets, I always tell people to, around the emotions of the conversation, a talking stick. You can have anything. One lady had a heart from her heart surgery that they gave her a little heart to squeeze. So she passed the heart around. She said, if anything gets too emotional, we'll do it where only the person having the heart can speak, because some people disagree and then they'll jump in, but that sort of diffuses it. Or just say, I hear what you're saying. I hear you. Just something as simple as that can often take that diffuse the emotions. Spirituality, it depends what their spiritual beliefs are. Some people have very deep religious beliefs. Some people have spiritual, which is not religious. And other people are just sort of even keeled, don't believe, have a big spiritual belief or religious, but honoring whatever it is that they practice and feel. That's why I always light a candle, say a poem or a prayer or meditation to start. And then at the end of these family meetings, I usually ask everyone to say how they feel and what they got out of this meeting.
Now, I want to talk about some of the actual physical things that are on the advance directive,
Yes.
on that form. And so many, as I said, people, they just check the boxes sometimes without a real understanding of what these things mean. I know that my father, we were in the emergency room a couple months back, and it was rather serious. And the doctor came in and said, I have to ask you, how do you feel about CPR? And my parents do not have an advance directive. They just won't talk about it. I've tried,
I'm
they just won't. And um, and so the doctor came in and asked my dad, how do you feel about CPR? My dad's, oh, you keep on giving it to me. You just keep on, keep me alive. I said, Dad, you said that you don't want to be put on a ventilator. And I and my dad, no, I don't. And I asked the doctor, I said, well, doctor, what's the percentage, or like, are you going to break his sternum when you do CPR, or is he going to have to be put on a ventilator? And the doctor was like, yeah, that is going to happen. And yes, he will have to be put on a ventilator. I said, well, what's the likelihood that he would even, at his age 80, survive this whole process? And so we went through that conversation. It was an uncomfortable conversation to have right in the emergency room. And it was very emotional.
Mhm.
But these are things that, you should discuss when you're doing the advance directive, but most people don't know about the actuality of what they're checking off. So how do you approach that, and what recommendations or what advice do you have for people?
Well, I approach it to ask what their knowledge of CPR is, because most of us, I love Barbara Carnes, who is a hospice nurse and sort of the guru of um, end of life care. And she has these t-shirts that say, people don't die like they do on TV. Yeah, I think that was it. But so I asked them, what's their knowledge of CPR? Oh, that's what they do when your heart stops. And on TV, all the medical shows, they come in, they're pounding on their chest, and by the end of the half an hour show, they've walked out of the hospital. They're upright and breathing and doing well and back to normal. What people don't understand is it was a procedure for restarting the heart and breathing when someone is healthy and something happens. Like, I don't know if you remember a year or two ago, a football player was hit just right, and hit so that at the point of the cycle of the heartbeat, it stopped his heart, and he ended up being CPR and defibrillated on the field. Well, he did live, and he walked away a week later out of the hospital, a few days later, just like on TV. But he was young, he was healthy, and they got it right away. I mean, CPR really has to be implemented within the first, 4 minutes. After 4 minutes, there's lack of oxygen has been too long to the brain, to the heart, to the kidneys, to the lungs. There's so many vital organs that rely on that oxygen, and without the flow. So what people don't realize is that it is blunt force trauma to your chest. Most often, especially if the people are more senior in age, as you push down on the chest, you can feel the ribs breaking. And as I had to do that a couple times, and it is not a fun experience, knowing that you're breaking these people's bones. Not always, you don't always break them, but CPR really to be effective, it has to go deep. So it was not intended for the elderly or the chronically ill. And I have a CPR guide that I love to give to people and have them read. But national studies show that 18 to 30% of people that receive CPR in the hospital survive and are discharged. 18 to 30%. And of those that do survive, 28% have significant cognitive or neurological disability. And of the nursing home residents outside of the hospital, there's about a 2% survival rate. So people don't understand that. And I'm passionate about CPR is great. Like for me, I'm in my early 60s. I really don't have any health problems. Sure, I'd probably want CPR at least attempted because I'm healthy. I don't have life limiting or chronic illnesses. I could survive a couple broken ribs. If I'm 85, 90, I would say I would, for me, and we each get to make our own choice. There's no right or wrong choice, but for me, I would choose not to. That's why I like to inform people of what it is. And so I send out this CPR guide that was put out by an organization that I have been a facilitator for.
It's funny that conversation that we're having with the doctor when I said, okay, what's the statistical likelihood of my father walking out of here after receiving CPR? And the doctor, he was young. I felt so bad. He kind of looked down and he kind of shook his head. He's like, not very good. It's the reality of it, but no one wants to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, my mom had eye surgery last August, and was 86, almost 87 at the time. Healthy, vibrant, but she has a valve issue in her heart that is going to need replacement. And the anesthesiologist came into the room, and he was sort of like, your cardiologist is fine with this surgery? And she said, yes, I've been cleared for this surgery. She just had to be under general anesthesia for about 10 minutes. And he was going on and on, just sort of, well, are you sure he gave you clearance? And she said, yes, I wouldn't be here if he didn't. And he's like, well, things can happen. And he was just sort of dancing around it. So I said, Mom, here's the deal. If your heart stops in surgery, do you want them to perform CPR and try to revive you? And I said, I'll tell you, it's not like it would be outside of the hospital. You get to choose, but they will have all of the equipment right there. And if they were to try to revive you, would you want to be put on a ventilator? She's like, well, at this point, I'd want to try to revive me, but no ventilator. I said, okay, is that good for you, doc? But doctors are even have a hard time talking about this.
Yep. So how do you work with healthcare professionals when it comes to, respecting and implementing an individual's wishes?
I will tell you from my own experience, I've had a couple surgeries in the last couple years. So I always update my advance directives, or I check them before I've gone into surgery and update them and take them to the hospital. But then I speak with the anesthesiologist when he comes in, and I have my advance directives. And if this happens, this is what I would want. And then I make sure the surgeon knows. But I always encourage everyone, especially those that are on Medicare, 65 and over, can have an appointment dedicated specifically to talking about end of life planning. Some doctors are very good at it and others are not. And but it's really important to go in and talk to them and ask them, are you willing to speak with me about this? Are you willing to honor my wishes as I have them written out? And I always tell people, if their doctor won't talk about it, or if they say, no, I can't honor that wish, then even if it's been a doctor for many years that you love, this is talking about your end of life journey. If after a couple appointments they say, no, I could not do that, then it's time to seek a new doctor. And just realize that doctors are really not healthcare, not just doctors, healthcare professionals are really not taught a lot about death and dying in their training. Um, Most of them, I always think it's getting a little better, but I have a son in medical school and he took a Dying in America class because he had volunteered for hospice, really wanted to learn more about being present and being the best he could be for those that he will future care for the future at the end of life. And he told me it was the first class was writing an essay. It was an 8-week elective. And the next 7 weeks, they brought in cancer survivors. And so at the end, he talked to the professor and said, I took this class because I wanted to learn how to best serve my patients at the end of their life. I'm planning to go into some sort of field where I'll have relationships with my patients. And if I have to be that person for them. But he said, really, what you taught me was that people can survive cancer. And he said, I really like to encourage you to maybe dive deeper into what we should do with those that are dying at the end of life, how we can best support them. So I was really proud of him for speaking up and saying, but he's like, Mom, I was so disappointed in that class.
We have a friend who we're talking to. He is a surgeon, and he was asking what I do, and because this was a career change for me at the time, and when we're talking about why I was, why I became a death doula, he actually he looked at me. He said, "Traci, you doctors need to hear this kind of stuff because we don't know how to deal with death. We haven't been taught. It's a failure if a person passes away, if a person dies."
Right. And in their defense, that's what they go. They go to learn how to heal, how to care for, not how to support someone in the end of life. They want to save them, not
Yeah.
save them. But there's organizations out there. There's an organization called Vital Talk that they're teaching healthcare professionals to have serious illness conversations with their patients. Now it's not big and known. It's supported through University of Washington and the Conversation Project, I think, out of Boston. And so the movement is starting, but there's a group of healthcare professionals that are committed to teaching people how to have these serious illness conversations. And it's such a gift. This is one thing I do know when I worked with people who were dying, they knew they were dying and they wanted to talk about it, but most often they couldn't talk about it with their families. They talked about it with us nurses. And that's a shame because there's such richness in the conversation with families that can talk about this and you can laugh, you can cry, but it really brings you so much closer to that person. Um, so I really always encourage people to share their wishes or their thoughts on end of life with their family members.
Since you've been in the medical field, what advice do you have for healthcare providers to better support their patients and their clients and their families with advanced directives?
I think don't just ask, do you have your advanced directives? Ask, share your wishes with me so I can best serve you. Why do you want this decision? And I tell the people I work with, ask your doctor where you are in your health now. What would be the probability of you surviving CPR? What would be the probability of um, dialysis? People don't realize dialysis is life support. Artificial tube feedings is life support. All of these things, and so if you put me on this tube feeding, how long would you keep me on it? I mean, at what point would you be willing to say that it's not helping and that I should be taken off? Will you be honest with me? Will you tell me your honest opinion? Not just like, okay, well, there's nothing more we can do, so let's call hospice. which is what so many of the doctors or the healthcare providers do. So I would encourage them to be honest and open. And when someone asks you a difficult question, answer it. Don't skim over it because you miss a valuable opportunity. I have a friend that is very ill right now, and she has stage 4 lung cancer with multiple metastasis, and she's younger, and I've been going to her doctor's appointments with her, and at her second appointment, she told the doctor, "Well, doctor, my goal is full remission." And I looked at him and he said, "Okay," and went right on to the next question. Instead of sitting and talking with her and saying, "Let's talk about that. What's your idea of full remission?" This is what I did after the appointment. I said, "Would you like to talk about remission?" "Oh yeah, that's my goal, to get into full remission." I said, "What's your understanding of it?" So she told me, and I said, which was no cancer. And I said, um, "Do you want me to tell you about full remission?" And she and her husband said, "Yes." I said, "Full remission is not possible for you because you have multiple metastatic lesions in your brain and your bones." And I said, "But what is possible is to live with quality of life as long as you can. And so let's talk about the goal of living well for the rest. Does that mean going through treatment to try to keep the cancer at bay as long as possible? Or does it mean just living with as much support as you can and quality as you can for as long as you can?" So we had a really great conversation that doctor bypassed.
Mhm.
And, everyone thinks oncologists, oh, yeah, well, they work with people with cancer and dying, but they still are in the hope of saving them or curing that cancer. So it is hard. And I do understand that. It is hard to have these conversations. It was really hard for me to have that conversation with her, but I wanted her to know the truth. And so if someone asks for the truth, give it to them.
So so people who have their advance directives or people who know who've had those conversations with their loved ones, how can they best advocate for themselves or loved ones about their end of life wishes when they're right in the moment, when they're in the hospital, or how can they ensure that the wishes are going to be followed?
Well, I would love to say that the wishes were followed 100% of the time, but they're not. And sometimes, as speaking with your healthcare decision maker, you say, "I would never want to go into any sort of living facility." With my uncle, I said, "How long can he stay in the hospital?" And they said 48 hours. So if he hadn't died within that 48 hours, he would have had to go against his wishes, but there would have been no option. And so sometimes um, the best way to advocate for the person is to follow their wishes and stand firm, even in the height of emotion, and to discuss it with family members, someone that is the decision maker. Have those conversations, be empathetic to the emotions of the those other family members, but stand firm in honoring the wishes of the person you're supporting. And for hospitals and doctors and healthcare providers to honor the wishes as they're written to the best extent that you can. Like, they couldn't have kept my uncle in the hospital, it just wasn't possible because of regulations and insurance reimbursement and all of that. But the more we can talk about it, the more we can talk about our wishes before we get to that point, the more peaceful it can be.
What changes or developments would you like to see in how advanced directives are discussed and how they're implemented, how people are educated about them?
I What I would love to see is that every hospital staff member that deals with patients is well versed in advanced directives, because they are not. Even nurses are not. You think, "Oh, the nurses, of course." For my surgery, I was the nurse was doing my pre-op intake, as they were prepping me. And she said, there's a question I have to ask, and I really hate to ask this. And do you have advance directives? And she's like, we have to ask it. And I said, I absolutely do. I just updated them. And I said, may I ask why you hate to ask that? She's like, well, it's just sort of depressing. People don't like to talk about it. I said, but it's so vitally important. I said, because I too am a nurse. She didn't know it at the time, but I said, you and I both know that anything can happen in surgery. I'm 99.9% sure I'm coming out on the other side of the surgery just fine, but there's always that possibility. And if not, I want my wishes honored. And I said, so I would really love for you to not be apologetic in answering that question. That could give someone peace of mind knowing that their wishes would be carried out if something happens. She's like, oh, I never thought of it that way. So really, that anyone that works in the healthcare field that deals with people um, knows about advanced directives.
Yeah, it's funny. When I went for surgery last time, they asked also, and they were really apprehensive. And I was like, here's a copy of it. And it is important to yeah, especially if a person is ill, might be in hospice, might not, to have copies readily available.
Right. Right. And so one other thing I want to make a plug for anyone that's has a chronic or life limiting illness, to talk to their doctors about the provider order for life sustaining treatment form, the PULSE form. It's the only form that emergency medical um, technicians and paramedics can follow outside of a hospital setting. Everyone's like, but they were a DNR and they did CPR anyway. They have to, legally, they have to. It doesn't matter if they have a DNR bracelet on. A do not resuscitate order is only followed in a medical setting. So there's other things. So much about the advanced directives, the living will portion, that could be another show, but just you don't have to have any medical experience to make these decisions. You just have to know what you would want and really read through the directives. And so many of them are so self-explanatory. What would you want in this situation? Well, really think about it. And if you don't have someone to guide you, really think what's a good day? What's living well? What would be quality of life for me at this point in my life? And don't think more than a year ahead, because I tell everyone, make that your birthday gift to yourself. Review your advanced directives. If you have a full will, review all of that annually to make sure that you have the right people in place, that things haven't changed, or if you get a chronic or life-limiting diagnosis, go back and reevaluate them and possibly redo them.
Yeah, and I know that some of the attorneys that I work with, they'll actually have the advance directive and they'll put it on as an addendum to
Mhm.
all of the estate planning. So they have
Yes.
their own little estate, the advance directive, living will inside, but they also have the addendum.
Yes. And like you said, it's usually 2, 3, 4 pages, and have them write out more. See attachment. I always tell them, get another blank piece of paper, write see attachment, and then question two, and just write as much as you feel that you need to write to give clear guidance to those that will be making decisions and those that will be affected by the decisions made.
Can you share some resources that our listeners can go to learn more about advance directives?
Oh, absolutely. I was a facilitator with Honoring Choices Pacific Northwest. They have a lot of resources and they lost their funding. They were grant funded. So their website is still up, but it's called Honoring Choices PNW.org. Also prepareforyourcare.org. If you just type in advanced directives and the state you live in, things will come up. So so there's a lot of resources out there. The Conversation Project, you can Google that. They have a lot of resources, and they have a lot of resources on how to have these conversations that matter with everyone that matters, your healthcare provider, your family, your spiritual advisors, your friends. Um, gosh, there's so many, but like I said, just Google Advance Directives in your state, Conversation Project, Stanford Letter Project is another one. That's great for writing those letters to people that you might want, or doing little videos, but saying what you want to say while you can say it.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you so much for being here today, and for the incredible work that you do with A Radiant Mourning. How can people get a hold of you if they want to?
Well, they can go to radiantmourning.com, which it's mourning as in grieving, not morning as in the dawn of day. So, or Maureen at radiantmourning.com.
Great. And I'll be sure to put that link in the description. So, folks, today's conversation has highlighted the importance of advance directives and the empowerment they offer us and our families in making informed decisions about end of life care. It's a reminder that we have options in how we honor our loved ones and ourselves, ensuring that our final wishes are respected and that our legacy is preserved in the way that we choose. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comfort and Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.